You're listening to the Ask a Theologian podcast, where we explore the intersection between theology and everyday life. Before we get started today, don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. You grab a coffee, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode.
Hey everybody, welcome to the podcast today. This is the Ask a Theologian podcast, and I'm excited today to have Dr. Jeffrey Lamp with us. Dr. Lamp is a senior professor of New Testament at the College of Theology at Oral Roberts University. Also written many things, and he's an all-around fun guy as well. Hey, welcome Dr. Lamp to the podcast today.
Well, thanks for the invitation.
Glad to have you here. Looking forward to having a conversation about eco-theology. And just thinking about the word eco-theology, just wondering, it kind of sounds a little bit like, the word theology dressed up in a green jacket. How do you define it, and why do you think it belongs in the center of biblical theology rather than kind of out on the fringes?
Well, I mean, the term eco-theology is one that's been around a while, a few decades.
Right.
I guess. So it's the name of the discipline, but whenever I'm speaking to groups, especially church-related groups, things of that nature, I actually prefer the term creation care.
Okay.
Because it shifts the focus away from what you might think is, all right, here's another one of those fringe theologies that
Right.
people talk about, right? It shifts it away from that, but also it spins it a little more practically, which is what I think eco-theology needs to be, not some esoteric area of reflection. It needs to be something that engages people in activism
Right.
to some degree. And so essentially, eco-theology, I think, is very closely related to a theology of creation.
Okay.
Right? So creation itself is the stage upon which eco-theology works.
Right.
So I think that as a related field to creation theology, it ends up being something I think that demands a little more attention.
Right. And so instead of just an academic, like you say, an academic subject, it's more practical, more pragmatic in a sense.
At least I think it should be. So it has a lot in common with other kinds of, I don't want to say fringe, but other kinds of areas of theology, like liberation theology,
Right.
Various ideological theologies or
Right.
criticisms.
Right.
It has built within it as an avenue for action,
Right. Okay.
and not just formulation.
So when we call it, as you're saying, calling it creation care, and it's a creation theology. So we go back to Genesis chapter 1, and
Mhm.
I'm assuming we're building off of God gives dominion to us, but that has been
Right.
taken both for, that's
Sure.
work in favor of creation theology, but also, or creation care, but also certainly against it. So what does reading that text ecologically actually look like?
I think the tack I take, and have taken in pretty much anything I've written on this subject, is that when we look at the passage in Genesis 1 that talks about human beings being created in the image of God,
Yes.
in some way, then human beings are a reflection of God. And the way it's framed in that passage, instead of going into all the esoteric discussions that have occupied theologians for
Right.
centuries, what is that makes us in the image of God?
Right.
Is it reason? Is it free will? What is it?
Augustine, yeah.
It's very simple in Genesis 1. It's that human beings are supposed to be, as I frame it, image-bearing co-regents with God in spreading God's benevolent care throughout all of
I
creation.
love it. Yeah, good.
And if you just read the text in order, when that text occurs, it's occurring at a point where sin hasn't entered into the picture yet.
Right.
So dominion has its own way of looking. It's not a domineering kind of thing. And I think when you go to the next chapter and you see in Genesis 2:15 that the job of the man in the garden is to, a good translation of that is basically to serve and to protect it. So if you take that Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, those references, I think they're mutually informing
Right.
as to what does dominion properly look like. Now, once the program goes off track, then dominion gets perverted.
The serve
in that
and
respect.
protect is no longer serve and protect. It's dominate and
And exploit.
exploit.
That's
Well,
basically what it comes down to.
There you go. Yeah. So we need to read that in context then of being this is what God intended, not pulling into all
Yeah,
this stuff. Yeah.
it's almost like it's that old thing. You had one job to do, and you blew that
Hey,
one.
Adam, you
So
had one job to do, and
you
you,
just
you,
one
you-
job.
one job. Just take care of this thing, and you
Just
didn't.
take care of this thing and move out and spread God's benevolent care throughout all of creation. And that's the building block of it for me. We can meditate on Genesis 1 and talk about how creation is good and all that kind of stuff. But I think in terms of eco-theology, the starting point is, why did God create human beings? And I think those two references in Genesis 1 and 2 help us see that. And in terms of a world now that has gone off track,
Right.
and especially once human beings have gotten the scientific and technological ability to radically alter our environments, this becomes a very crucial discussion to have.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do we reclaim that, what I call the original Adamic vocation? How does that get recapitulated
Into
by
a
Christ?
fallen world. Yeah, under Christ.
And how does that come forward to us? So as a vocation for us again. And now that we can really do serious harm to ourselves,
Yes.
I think it's important that the church, by and large, has taken this up. And whether, I think that probably a thing that most people have heard of perhaps was the encyclical that Pope Francis
Yes.
in the Roman Catholic Church put out about 10 years ago, 11 years ago now, and the care of our common home. Now, if you look into, let's say, the Pentecostal world,
Yeah.
there's no document like that.
No, there's no document. No.
And largely because there's no one person who can speak for them.
Sure. But as a
And-
whole, Pentecostalism's relationship with creation and eco-theology has probably been a little bit, I don't know, how would you say, volatile at times?
Yeah, it's been just sometimes the best way to say it is tenuous. It's
be
a
a
very
better
tenuous
word.
relationship. I think that's, and that's an unfortunate thing, because when you think about something like the Day of Pentecost,
Right.
which was just this past Sunday in the
yeah.
Western Church.
Yeah.
In the Eastern Church, it's this coming Sunday.
Oh, okay,
So
right.
you've had this grand narrative of the Spirit basically coming into the world and being poured out on all flesh. And some Pentecostals are coming to understand that means the Spirit's poured out into all creation.
Right. Right.
And is in the Nicene Creed, we talk about the Spirit as the Lord, the giver of life, the one who makes alive. And so I think Pentecostals should have
Should.
a rich understanding of being God's partner in caring for creation.
Right.
We tended not to have that
Right.
happen so much. Although I will say
It's changing.
It's changing.
Yeah.
And the reason that it is, when you look at how Pentecostals came about, if you go back to the old Azusa Street paradigm, all of the things that made Pentecostals distinctive all seem to constellate around that sense of being in mission, largely interpreted as evangelism.
Right. Yeah.
And you have to get that done before Jesus comes. And Jesus is coming really soon.
Right.
So there's no real sense in trying to fix up the world
Sure.
if paint a car if you're just going to drive it off a cliff.
Right.
So there's that kind of thing that now we have one job to do again, and it's
Right.
evangelism.
Right. Right.
So I think sometimes the eschatology in many of Pentecostal contexts, especially if it's the kind of pop dispensational thing that
Sure.
we've seen, like the Left
The
Behind
20th,
stuff,
Yeah. 27.
is so if you see that as your understanding of the end of the age, that we're all going to get raptured out of here and God's going to destroy the planet, we're all going to live in heaven forever.
Right.
It's really hard to work up a lot of excitement
Sure.
for that, for taking care of creation. But a lot of work that's been done that's helpful for creation care in the Pentecostal world is rethinking eschatology. So you're starting to see different models of eschatology
Right.
come on the scene that are much more favorable
Right.
to a understanding of caring for creation.
So I'm thinking about Revelation. For years, what I was taught was new creation. It's the new creation. But
Right.
really, if we're reading that correctly, it's the renewed creation.
Yeah, my friend Robbie Waddell teaches at Southeastern.
He's
He tells
actually the one that
story.
taught me that.
Yeah, he has had an old professor who said God is making all things new, not all new things.
Yeah,
And-
very good. Yeah.
And that's an important
Yeah.
that it's such a, if your worldview is dominated by a really quick ending to this whole thing,
Yeah.
then your emphasis is we just got to get as many people saved as we can.
Right.
But what if What if this thing holds on for another 100 years, 200 years, 5,000 years?
Sure.
Somebody's got to they're going to have water to drink and air to breathe.
Right.
And
Right.
soil that can produce food.
Right.
And I think at a very practical level, just a matter of just genuine love for your fellow human beings would dictate, I can't spoil this because others will come after me.
Now, one of the things you write about your work is Hebrews, and it's quite distinctive. I don't think I would think about going to Hebrews ecologically. But what does that letter bring to ecological thinking?
Yeah, that's going to take a little bit of backstory a little bit. My first foray into eco-theology
Yeah.
was actually at the Society of Biblical Literature about 20 years ago now. That I was getting tired. My area was really Pauline studies.
Right.
And I was like, good God, do we have to have one more paper exegeting a Pauline passage?
Don't say that around NT Wright. Yeah.
Yeah, he's the only one who kept it interesting. But in his case, 20 years ago, the new perspective on Paul was 30 years old.
Right.
Now it's 50 years old. Good Lord, we need something else. But I kind of looked for a new avenue, and I looked at what were my interests, just outside of work and stuff like that. And I've always been an outdoors person, camping, a lot of that stuff. And so I found this group called the Ecological Hermeneutics Group.
Okay, that's interesting.
And its emphasis is, how do we read the Bible, which we all need to admit is by and large not interested in our ecological issues.
Right.
Because they didn't have to worry about climate change and mercury poisoning.
2,000 years ago was a different technological age.
Yeah, we by and large couldn't do things on a massive scale
Right.
to destroy ourselves like that. And the text is generally, not overly involved in those kinds of considerations. So
Right.
the question becomes, if we're starting with today's world,
Yeah.
which is one in which ecological concerns are paramount.
Right.
If we start with that, how then do we go question the Bible? What can you contribute to these discussions?
Right.
And there was a particular way of doing that kind of thing. So the books that I did on Hebrews, one of them is just a collection of some studies that I'd done. But the other one was an entry in a commentary series,
Okay.
the Earth Bible Commentary, they
cool.
call it.
Okay.
And so I did the one on Hebrews. And what it is it's basically a matter of saying, I'm going to admit right up front, Hebrews is not concerned about ecology. It just really isn't, because it's not on the author's mind.
Sure.
But given what the author has said, are there ways to go into it and say, all right, are there ways that we can, even in certain cases, subvert what the author is saying?
Sure.
In order to find an ecological implication where there really isn't one present,
Right.
At least explicitly present. So when you kind of look at least in what I find in the opening chapters of Hebrews, for example, you start off Hebrews with the assessment that God spoke in previous times through prophets, but now he speaks through a son
Right.
through whom everything comes into existence.
Right.
He's the one who's God's agency in creation.
Yeah.
And then you move into chapter 2 and you start seeing this interesting discussion between what do you do with that son who's created everything,
Right.
who then becomes human, in order to pull humanity back into the calculus of these things. So what you basically end up seeing, I think, is that, and early church fathers talked about this, that basically when the son becomes human, takes on human flesh, what he basically does is he kind of sums up, recapitulates the Adam story.
Right.
So basically trying to take back the Adam story.
Right.
And then what was Adam's one job?
Right.
It was to care for it
Care
and
for the
deal
world.
with the creation. And one of the things I make a big point about in everything I do is that the incarnation is extremely important, because when you look at the Genesis tradition in chapter 2 of the making of the human being, the making of the man, God takes this, as the imagery is, God takes this clump of dirt, he forms it, and then he breathes life into it. So a human being in its constitution is created from the stuff of earth. There's an intimate connection between earth and the human being. So now when Jesus takes that on, that's a statement that there's an intimate connection between the earth and the humanity Jesus assumes. So he doesn't just assume human form, he assumes the stuff of creation.
Right. That's cool. I like that.
Yep. And what that means is then when Jesus brings about salvation, because he's taken on flesh, it's not just a salvation
Right.
of human beings, it's a salvation of the entire cosmos.
And it's not just a spiritual idea, spiritual salvation, which is our Platonic understanding of the dualisms. We're getting past that.
Pardon the pun, but it's a very earthy kind of thing. You're getting your hands dirty with
Yeah.
this kind of theology.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that I think is important. What does Jesus do to help bring back the original Adamic vocation?
Right.
And that's what I think is the fundamental sort of working gears
Right.
in how what I see eco-theology doing.
And that in Hebrews, and this is it always.
Yeah, because there is this real, there's especially in the early chapters, there's this sense that we have to talk about the creation of human beings
Yeah.
and the one who became a human being. So there's this connection. Then there's the citation from Psalm 8 in chapter 2 of Hebrews. Well, what is man that you've made him a little bit? So you start getting this kind of thing all going on here. And Psalm 8 is in many ways a creation type of psalm. Those themes are present in it. And I think that you start seeing this intertwining of themes. But then let's go to you get into chapter 4 in Hebrews, where there's this interesting connection between, the comparison of Jesus and Joshua,
Okay.
the one who brings people into the land. So basically what's happening there is this understanding that the physical land is in some sense being reevaluated.
Right.
Now we think of the rest that was supposed to have come through Joshua actually coming through Christ.
Right.
But what ends up happening then is if Jesus in his human constitution embodies the stuff of earth, and then there's this talk of the land that's going on in Hebrews 4, then what we see is that Jesus obviously has a bigger intention than just that certain number of small square miles.
Right.
There in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Because he's the heir of all things, going back to chapter 1. So all of creation is his.
Right. Yes.
And so it expands beyond the land, the narrow definition of land.
Right. Right.
So I mean,
you go ahead.
So what you do is you kind of say, all right, what are these themes that arise in Hebrews that the author seems to want to talk about? And then say, is there a way we can look at that to get an ecological implication out of it? So I think that's what that strategy is trying to do.
Right.
Now, I'll be honest with you. Some people like it and some don't.
Fair.
Many people are just like, this isn't a, what do we call it? A grammatical historical exegesis of Hebrews.
It's not spiritual enough either. Yeah.
And there's a lot of those out there. So go read those.
Yeah.
But I had to make sure that I made that the caveat at the front. I'm not doing a traditional commentary.
Right.
This is a commentary that's going about it from this way. And so a lot of that early stuff I did was saying, how can you play with that method of interpreting the Bible?
Right. Yeah, so that's led you to, that's over a number of years. Now, your most recent book, Geo-liturgy, you expand a whole lot more on that whole idea.
Yeah, and that's more of a theology, more of eco-theology proper.
Right.
The other stuff you could argue was, it's eco-theology, but it's going at it through a particular mode of interpretation of the Bible.
Hermeneutical.
It's a certain
ecology.
hermeneutical.
Yeah.
But this is more of an eco-theology, and what I started branching out beyond ecological hermeneutics probably about 10 or 11 years ago,
Right.
more into a theological kind of thing. And so what I wanted to do with that book was play on that word, Geo-liturgy.
Yeah, it's a cool word.
I was constantly scouring the internet. Has anybody used that word before?
Leonard Sweet would love you. Making up words.
Making up words. Now, there was a such thing called eco-liturgy,
Right.
which wasn't really what I was after. That's how do you incorporate ecological themes into Sunday morning worship settings?
Right.
What I was doing with Geo-liturgy, geo comes from the Greek word or gay, depending upon which Greek pronunciation you want, where we get our words like geology.
Right.
And it has to do with the ground, the earth.
Yeah.
So this is an earth liturgy that is trying to conceive of a liturgy that is expressed not just in church, but in real life. Okay. So that, and the subtitle is something like the spiritual practice of caring for creation or something like that.
I don't know. You wrote the book.
I read the book, but
I know the publisher decides the title, so
yeah, we went around. I said the only thing that I'm absolutely committed to is Geo-liturgy. That has to be there because that's my word. And, but the spiritual practice of caring for creation, I think that's it. Is I wanted to see it. How does caring for creation become intrinsic to the practice of our faith?
Yeah.
Not just what do we do in church.
Right.
Now I make mention throughout the book of things that you can do in church that are kind of connected with that. But when I'm trying to look at, and I use the Nicene Creed, the major points mentioned in the Nicene Creed. So there are chapters that go along with each of those things. Yeah. So when you talk about God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, all things visible and invisible, what does that mean ecologically? And what you find is in the Creed, there's a whole lot of it that's really dedicated to putting this stuff together.
Yeah. Yeah.
How does the Father participate in putting stuff together? How does the Son do that? How does the Spirit do that? And there's a lot there. And then when you move into things like you believe in the Holy Catholic Church, you believe in baptism, the life to come, or the church, all these kinds of things come together and say, how do we live a kind of fully orbed life around our confession that cares for creation? Yeah. But I didn't want it to be a book that just talked about, here's 100 ways that you can help make your world a better place. Pick up that gum wrapper, you know.
I think there's about 100 and maybe more than 100 books on that topic already.
Oh yeah, there's tons of them. I just started looking for them for references. And I thought, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start with this. There's so many. And that's good. That stuff's good, obviously.
Most of them aren't written from a theological perspective, though.
Not really. Yeah. They might have a little bit of a justification if it's a Christian audience of you, but generally they're not interested in. What I wanted to do here is say, creation care is intrinsic to being a Christian because it's been the one job Adam had.
This one.
And also too, I play this game when I talk about this in classes. I'm also an instructor in the environmental science department at ORU. So about once a year, I teach a class in the science department and the theology department. I bet. So it's a lot of fun, but I talk about the end times chart. Yeah. Okay. And I show them this and I'm like, okay, but here's my chart. So I have a chart that starts with Genesis 1. Yeah. Yeah. And it talks about in Genesis 2, the two passages we talked about.
Creation passages.
Yeah. And then there's just this long line. And then somewhere I put a hash mark that says the Jesus thing. So when you sum up the whole Jesus thing, or what a lot of scholars used to call like the Christ event or something, that whole thing, so that I just reduced it to one slash and there's another slash. And that line has a scriptural reference, Revelation 11:18, which the song is sung. And it's talking about, we're in that whole judgment thing. Right. And the last part of the verse, it talks about how God will destroy those who destroy the earth. And it's a passage that people just generally don't read.
I don't know that I've ever noticed that one.
But when you start off with what it tells me is that if you start off with the job, here's your job, and you're still going to be assessed on it at the end, the job never went away.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes. Now we just have to figure out how does the train get put back on track? Right. And you start seeing pieces in the Old Testament that kind of get you there. But then finally, when Jesus comes along and when you really delve into what he's done, especially through the incarnation, I think becomes a little more clear that the job never went away. Now the question is, what do we do about it? Yeah. How do we incorporate that back into the conscious act of living as Christians in the world?
Right. Okay, so I'm a pastor. I'm listening to Dr. Lamb lay out fairly convincingly that the Bible actually tells us that we're supposed to take care of creation, not just use it. And so I'm convinced. Now, when I'm a pastor, I'm a leader in a church that's not convinced. What should I do? What should I do?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is a matter of, I don't want to say reprogramming, but we have to kind of change our way of thinking. If we've not been convinced, for example, if you're in a North American context, but especially in the United States, look, we're driven by this desire to have more. And whatever helps us have more, we're in favor of. Unfortunately, the more that we want to have and the ways of getting that more are generally not good for the planet.
Right.
So then the question becomes re-education. Do we really need all that stuff? And that's not even a matter of primarily ecology. It's a matter of just the red letters.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it's, and that's what I'm trying to do, is to see, look, this ecological consciousness is not this kind of thing where you have to go out and start hugging trees
Right.
and chaining yourself to redwoods and bulldozers and scratching up Teslas and whatever else you want to do.
Hey, don't mess
You
with my
know,
Tesla. Yeah.
But it's one of those things that the reason there's an ecological crisis is because it's intrinsic to sin and how it's infiltrated human beings and our societies and the way we engage the world around us.
Right.
So in many ways, just addressing the sin issue is part of it. I think ecology can give you a real good kind of case study for that and say, look, if we're spending so much time accumulating stuff,
Right.
and then we read the words of Jesus, sell all you have, give to the poor.
Yeah.
That starts putting things into real stark categories. And then say, yes, and look at how much energy we expend trying to get stuff that is not good for us. And what's it doing to the world around us?
Right.
One of the issues I'm starting to turn my attention to, because you have to, is artificial intelligence.
Sure. Yeah.
And everybody's worried about it. I get so many papers turned in now that these little AI detectors are telling me 100% of this thing was generated by AI. Now, it might be wrong,
It might be.
but I'm like,
It's a real
I tell
issue
the
for a
story.
professor, for sure. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
And I realized it. I also teach a class on the Bible and Bob Dylan.
Okay.
And
Oh, that sounds
I
like
had
fun.
a person. It's a blast.
Yeah.
But someone was doing an interpretation of a Dylan song, and he talked about Bob Dylan's paratactic metaphors.
Paratactic metaphors.
Now,
This is an
here's what I
undergraduate.
knew.
This is an undergraduate class.
Undergraduate.
Right. Okay.
This I knew for a fact. They did not know what the word paratactic
I don't know what
meant.
it means, but I'm actually pretty smart.
But so there's that level, but then there's the other level. How much water and how
Yes.
much electricity
Yeah.
is required to power these data centers?
Yeah.
And there's a big one being considered out in Utah's in the middle of a multi-year drought.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you need water to cool these things, electricity to power these things, and all that stuff you got to generate that electricity somehow.
Yeah.
Apparently it's not being done by hydroelectric means because there's a drought.
Yes.
So it becomes a real thing down here, even in Oklahoma. It is amazing how many protests there have been in the last 6 months against building these data centers, though they promise jobs
Right.
and economic
Right.
growth and stuff like this. A real issue there
Yeah.
that has
Yeah.
to be addressed. And I think that to go back to your question about you as a pastor, what if we're able to kind of talk like this and frame it in terms of not just a sin issue, but also a matter of loving your neighbor as yourself?
Right.
I think these kinds of ways of framing it, because I don't know where do you live?
Canada.
Okay, I don't really know what Canada's like.
Come
There
visit
are
us
a lot of
sometime. We've
pla-
got great camping. Great. Well, I mean, well, lots of great stuff, but yeah,
lots of great stuff, yeah, and a lot fewer people.
a lot fewer
In the
people.
United
Yeah.
States.
Yeah.
When you stop and start looking at like in the United States where you live, you have a lot of these population centers that are just really interested in, we live our lives like everybody else around us, except on Sunday morning.
There's
And the
a
question-
sad fact. That's true. Yeah.
And that's just it, is how then do we see these transformations take place in people?
Yeah.
Because around here, in a very red state,
Sure.
I mean, the only redder state in the country might be Utah.
Okay.
But there are a lot of these red states that basically think, like Rush Limbaugh used to call them, environmentalist wackos. That the environmentalists are a bunch of hippie socialist freaks that
Right.
are trying to tear apart American
Right.
life.
Yeah, it's politicized.
And it gets politicized tremendously. And it's basically a turnoff. So when I go
Sure.
speak to churches about this stuff, I never use the word environmentalism and I never use the word ecology.
Right.
I only use creation care.
Right. Right.
And
That makes sense.
because now I'm bringing the concept of the creator into the
Yes.
discussion.
Yeah.
And we're hopefully not thinking first and foremost about the hippies.
Right. Yeah.
So-
That's huge. That's wisdom. That's great.
So it's a lot of times it's just a little chess match.
Yeah.
Now, if I were going to, let's say, like Portland, Oregon,
Right. Yeah. Yeah, we know
I mean,
Portland. That's even in Canada,
yeah,
we know
Portland.
Portland. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm probably not going to have a hard time selling the
right,
idea to a bunch of people in Portland, Oregon.
right.
But selling the idea even in Tulsa, Oklahoma, it's sometimes there've been times I've been involved in discussions and I wondered if I was going to get out alive. Usually, the biggest ringleaders of those things are Pentecostals.
Right.
That's and so that's where in the Pentecostal world, that's a big issue.
It is.
And
It is.
I think there are trends turning,
Yeah. Right.
tides turning, but a little ways to go.
Got to keep pushing it, or just nudging. I guess nudging.
Yeah, you want to nudge,
Nudge,
and I
nudge.
mean, you don't want to be another finger wagger, but
No, we have enough of that.
yeah, there's enough finger pointing going on in the world.
A little
so-
nudging, and a little nudging to remember your creator.
Exactly.
Remember,
And that key word, creator,
yeah,
means there's a creation.
yeah. I was just thinking as we were talking, I was just thinking into Genesis again. The curse was sin. The curse was also on the land. In fact,
Yeah, I mean-
that's actually the only curse. Was the
Right,
curse
yeah.
on the land, and obviously God didn't intend the land to be cursed.
It's just any way you cut it. There's this. I speak of this triad. You see it in Genesis, but you see it everywhere else too. But it's the God, human, other than human triad.
Mm.
So how do those three, if you think of them in a triangle, how do all of those vertices get joined together?
Right.
You know, so God human relation, a God creation relation,
Yeah.
and a creation and human relation, and that sin's basically corrupted
Everything.
all of those connections.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and like it or not, Paul speaks of it in Romans 8 that once human beings fell off the tracks,
Right.
Everything they touch goes off the
Yeah.
tracks.
Yeah.
And so the created world is moaning and groaning, as Paul says.
Right. Groaning for the revealing. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think that's our reality.
Yeah.
Everything we touch, we break, it seems like.
And everything we make is breakable. So
Yeah, because we got to make more. Otherwise,
I feel like we're bringing up. I've just got so many questions in my head that we won't have time to look at today, because that's eschatology. It's creation. It's all of that. Really, it's eco-theology or creation care is part of everything.
try to imagine any aspect of your life that doesn't involve creation.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you have to drink the water, you have to breathe the air,
Yeah.
everything we look at in our office, everything, even the stuff we call synthetic was made from something we found around us.
Yeah. Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know, so
Yeah. We didn't create anything. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're just kind of putting things together in different combinations and coming up with some stuff. It's an interesting field. And this year at Society for Pentecostal Studies, we actually started a new interest group, the environment and sustainability interest
Okay.
group.
Okay. The one I heard about was pet theology, but
Now, animal theology is a part of that.
I want to be careful. I don't want to go down that road today, because me and Daniela Riso are still having a conversation about that. So
Good. Yeah, it's an interesting field. The field has been around for a while.
Right.
She's like the only Pentecostal I've ever heard of that went into it. So now I've looked into it some. I've written a few things on it, and but again, there it is, right? One of the things we tend to like, we Americans like our dogs. We like our dogs, and we get really upset. I have a T-shirt that says, "I don't care who dies in a movie as long as the dog lives."
now I've always thought Americans love their dogs, but I just came back from Hong Kong, and I got to tell you, you've got nothing on them. In Hong Kong, the dogs, I took a day, we went to Hong Kong Disney, sorry, but we did do it. And I've never seen so many dogs in strollers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. Listen, I want to say thank you for taking the time to chat with me and on this topic, because I think there's so much more to this, and so much more just fundamental understanding for people to get out of this. And I hope our listeners have at least been provoked a little bit to think this through a little bit more.
There's a lot out there, a lot to think about, and I'm really gratified that in the last 15, 20 years or so, you start seeing more and more of the Pentecostal world beginning to engage it. And interestingly, a huge part of that is in the majority world.
Yeah, I have to say the first encounter I had with Pentecostals and eco-theology was a book called Tongues and Trees, AJ Swoboda.
AJ Swoboda, yeah. Yeah. And really to
from
this,
Portland.
yeah, of course. And really to this day, it's really the only real fully monograph-sized Pentecostal engagement with creation care.
Wow.
There's a lot written on it,
Yeah.
but most of what's written are these collections of articles.
Right.
There's not, and my book is, the Geo-liturgy book is the coming together of my Pentecostal influences and Eastern Orthodox influences.
Right.
It's mostly Orthodox, but there's some key places where Pentecostalism figures into the argument because I think it has to.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what really needs to happen is someone needs to sit down and take the next step. Here is a full monograph length treatment of eco-theology from a Pentecostal
I think
angle.
you're just writing your next book proposal.
Oh, I've got 4 or 5 things in my list, and I just kind of look at the calendar and I'm kind of running out of years, and it's just kind of, how does this all get done? And in that list are books on Woody Guthrie and Bob Dylan. So there's a few things in there that have to kind of work around that. You have to have your pet project.
We'll have to talk about that later. Yeah.
Yeah.
Remind us again the name of your latest book, Geo-liturgy. Where can we find it?
Geo-liturgy. Yeah. The book is, I researched a lot to write the book. The one thing I didn't research well enough was the publisher. It's an expensive book.
Okay.
It's about $90.
Oh, it must be on Brill.
And it's not as bad as Brill.
Okay.
It's Lexington is the publisher, but it's Geo-liturgy, the spiritual practice of caring for creation.
Right. And you also have stuff in the Earth Biblical Commentary.
Yeah, the Hebrews. Yeah. There's a Hebrews volume in the Earth Bible Commentary series.
So if you were going to recommend just one book that people could take away and say, hey, this will help me, what would you recommend?
I think the thing, really, the last book is what I really was aiming everything toward.
Right.
And again, like I said, the problem is it's expensive. So get it at a library if you're a theology student or something like that.
Right.
Interlibrary loan, do something like that. You don't need to, I'm not going to get rich off of it anyway. The only people buying it are really friends, family, and libraries.
Right.
So yeah, I would look at it there. One thing I have committed to do is to kind of take that book and write a sort of more concise and inexpensive version of it, written more in language, not academic,
more accessible.
Yeah, I just kind of decided that it's the book I wanted to write, but at the end of the day, how widely disseminated is it going to be because of the cost?
Right. And
one of those projects I was talking about is the sort of reshaping that into a more popular trade type of presentation.
Get into the hands of more people. Just exactly what we need to do.
Yeah, and not have to make them sacrifice meals to buy it. So.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Hey, Dr. Lamb, thanks so much for taking time, and I really appreciate it. And
you're welcome.
I'm sure listeners will appreciate this and be prodded and poked a little bit and moving forward in that. So it'll be awesome. Thanks again. Talk to you soon.
All right. You're welcome.
Hey, thanks for listening to the show today. We normally release about 2 episodes a month, so if you don't want to miss out, make sure to hit the subscribe button. If you enjoy the podcast, it would really help us get the word out if you could take a moment and give us a review and a rating, preferably really, really, really good. Also, if you've got some suggestions for future guests or topics, please shoot me an email. My email address is Dave, D-A-V-E, at theaskatheologianpodcast.com. That's Dave, D-A-V-E, at theaskatheologianpodcast.com. So thanks for listening, and we'll talk again soon.